All right. It has been some time since I've last made a reading or vlog of any kind. Um, my little webcam thing broke, so I am actually sticking this webcam on a stack of books. Unsurprisingly, um, so with all that said, this morning I was reading some passages from the physicist Carlo Rovelli's book called "There Are Places in the World Where Rules Are Less Important Than Kindness and Other Thoughts on Physics, Philosophy, and the World." So, for those who don't know, and I'm not the most acquainted with all the famous physicists out there. But Carlo Rovelli is a theoretical physicist who has made significant contributions to the physics of space and time. He has worked in Italy and the United States and is currently directing the quantum gravity research group of the Centre de Physique Théorique in Marseille, France. His books, 7 Brief Lessons on Physics, Reality is Not What It Seems, The Order of Time, and Helgoland are international bestsellers and have been translated into more than 50 languages. So, this particular book, There Are Places in the World Where Rules Are Less Important Than Kindness, are a collection of essays on various things like philosophy and science and some of his social activism as well. So, this book was originally published in 2018. I think this current edition is 2020, but I'm just going to start reading since it is quite fascinating. Just read 3 different passages. The first one is talking about Newton the Alchemist. Newton the Alchemist, let me see if I can do that, written on March 19th, 2017. I'm going to share a screen as well. Let me see if I can get it up. Should be. There we go. So the page I'm sharing in the background is actually from the Indiana University page, where they have the entire manuscript of the chemistry and the alchemy that Newton did. So for those who don't realize it, Newton was actually an alchemist. So let me just read this. In 1936, Sotheby's put up for an auction a collection of unpublished writings by Sir Isaac Newton. The price is low, £9,000. Not much when compared to the £140,000 raised that season from the sale of a Rubens and a Rembrandt. Among the buyers is John Maynard Keynes, the famous economist, who was a great admirer of Newton. Keynes soon realized that a substantial part of the manuscript writings dealt with a subject that few would have expected Newton to be interested in, namely alchemy. Keynes sets out to acquire all of Newton's unpublished writings on the subject. Keynes, I guess I should say, that's a philosopher, and soon realizes further that alchemy was not something that the great scientist was marginally or even briefly curious about. His interest in it lasted throughout his life. Newton was not the first of the age of reason, Keynes concludes. He was the last of the magicians. In 1946, Keynes donated his unpublished Newtonia to the University of Cambridge. The strangeness of Newton in alchemical guise, seemingly so at odds with the traditional image of him as a father of science, has caused the majority of historians to give the subject a wide berth. Only recently has interest in his passion for alchemy grown. Today, a substantial amount of Newton's alchemical texts have been put online by researchers at Indiana University and are now accessible to everyone. Their existence still has a capacity to provoke discussion and to cast a confusing light over his legacy. Newton is central to modern science. He occupies this preeminent place because of his exceptional scientific results, mechanics, the theory of universal gravity, optics, the discovery that white light is a mixture of colors, differential calculus. Even today, engineers, physicists, astronomers, and chemists work with equations written by him and used concepts that he first introduced. But even more important than all this, Newton was the founder of the very method of seeking knowledge that today we call modern science. He built upon the work and ideas of others, Descartes, Galileo, Kepler, etc., extending a tradition that goes back to antiquity. But it is in his books that what we now call the scientific method found its modern form, immediately producing a mass of exceptional results. It is no exaggeration to think of Newton as the father of modern science. So what on earth does alchemy have to do with any of this? By the way, interrupt here that I'm going to stop sharing the background. But if anybody interested, you could go to the Indiana University, the Bloomington. Well, Bloomington is where Indiana University is located. But you can go there and you could actually look at some of the things which are like, look, alchemical symbols from like this chapter for the transcription. Magnesia omnis species artis conceal conjure p 434. So somebody transcribed all this, typed it up. You can look at the original image too. Let me see if I can just click on this. I don't know if it's coming up. Okay, let me see if I could. This is really interesting that Newton is actually somebody who, is like, let me see if I can, let me just see if I can share the whole screen actually. Because this is really interesting, and that, Newton, whom I think I knew at some point that he was somebody who definitely did a lot of this work in terms of alchemy. I just didn't realize to what extent he did it. But yeah, so he apparently he was extensive alchemist. So let me see if I can just share maybe this window. Let me see if this works. Yes, okay, it does work. So if I could go to the next page. Yep, so I keep this in the background. This is some of his alchemical text that he wrote up back in the, well, okay, so that's blank. Some of this. Okay. I wonder if he draws any diagrams. He probably does. Let me see if I can extend that. Okay. All right, I'll keep it to the first page here. So you can see that here. Sorry. All right. This is just an example, not saying like some students or whatnot, professors, researchers from Bloomington, Indiana University has already taken a great amount of work in transcribing all these, so you don't have to interpret what the scratches on this manuscripts are. All right, let me continue. There are those who have seen this anomalous alchemical activities evidence of mental infirmity brought on by premature aging. There are others who have served their own ends by attempting to enlist the great Englishman among critics of the limitations of scientific rationality. I think things are much simpler than this. The key lies in the fact that Newton never published anything on alchemy. The papers that show his interest in the subject are extensive, but they are all unpublished. This lack of publication has been interpreted as a consequence of the fact that alchemy has been illegal in England since as early as the 14th century. But the law prohibiting alchemy was lifted in 1689. And besides, if Newton had been so worried about going against laws and conventions, he would not have been Newton. Absolutely true. There are those who have portrayed him as some kind of demonic figure, attempting to glean extraordinary and ultimate knowledge that he wanted to keep exclusively for himself to enhance his own power. But Newton really had made extraordinary discoveries and had not sought to keep those to himself. He published them in his great books, including the Principia, with the equations of mechanics still used today by engineers to build airplanes and edifices, and spacecraft trajectories too. Newton was renowned and extremely well respected during his adult life. He was president of the Royal Society, the world's leading scientific body at the time. The intellectual world was hungry for his results. Why did he not publish anything based on all these alchemical activities? The answer is very simple, and I believe that it dispels the whole enigma. He never published anything because he never arrived at any results that he found convincing. Today, it is easy to rely on the well-digested historical judgment that alchemy had theoretical and empirical foundations that were far too weak. It wasn't quite so easy to reach the conclusion in the 17th century. Alchemy was widely practiced and studied by many, and Newton genuinely tried to understand whether it contained a valid form of knowledge. If he had found in alchemy something that could have withstood the method of rational and empirical investigation that he himself was promoting, there can be no doubt that Newton would have published his results. If he had succeeded in extracting from the disorganized morass of the alchemical world something that could have become science, then we would surely have inherited a book by Newton on the subject, just as we have books by him on optics, mechanics, and universal gravity. He did not manage to do this, and so he published nothing. Was it vain hope in this first place? Was it a project that should have been discarded even before it began? On the contrary, many of the key problems posed by alchemy and quite a few of the methods it developed, in particular with reference to the transformation of one chemical substance into another, are precisely the problems that would soon give rise to the new discipline of chemistry. Newton does not manage to take the critical step between alchemy and chemistry. That would be down to scientists of the next generation, such as Lavoisier, to achieve. The text put online by Indiana University shows this clearly. So you can look at the background here. It is clear that the language used is typically alchemical, metaphors and allusions, veiled phrases, and strange symbols. But many of the procedures described are nothing more than simple chemical processes. For example, he describes the production of oil of vitriol, sulfuric acid, aqua fortis, nitric acid, and spirit of salt, hydrochloric acid. By following Newton's instructions, it is possible to synthesize these substances. The very name that Newton used to refer to his attempts at doing so is a suggestive one, chemistry. Okay, now it's spelled Chymistry. Late post-Renaissance alchemy strongly insisted on the experimental verification of ideas. It was already beginning to face in the direction of modern chemistry. Newton understands that somewhere within the confused miasma of alchemical recipes, there is a modern science, in the quote-unquote Newtonian sense, hidden, and he tries to encourage its emergence. He spends a great deal of time immersed in it, but he doesn't succeed in finding the thread that will untie the bundle, and so publishes nothing. Alchemy was not Newton's only strange pursuit and passion. There is another one that emerges from his papers that is perhaps even more intriguing. Newton puts enormous effort into reconstructing biblical chronology, attempting to assign precise dates to events written about in the Holy Book. Once again, from the evidence of his papers, the results were not great. The father of science estimates that the beginning of the world happened just a few thousand years ago. Why did Newton lose himself in this pursuit? History is an ancient subject. Born in Miletus with Hecatius, is already fully grown with Herodotus and Thucydides. I don't know Greek. I'm probably not saying the names right. There is a continuity between the work of historians of today and those of antiquity, principally in the critical spirit that is necessary when gathering and evaluating the traces of the past. The book of Hecatius begins thus: I write things that seem to be true, for the tales of the Greeks are many and laughable as they seem to me. But contemporary historiography has a quantitative aspect linked to the crucial effort to establish the precise dates of past events. Furthermore, the critical work of a modern historian must take into account all the sources, evaluating the reliability and weighing the relevance of information furnished. The most plausible reconstruction emerges from this practice of evaluation and of weighted integration of the sources. Well, this quantitative way of writing history begins with Newton's work on biblical chronology. In this case, too, Newton's on the track of something profoundly modern, to find a method for the rational reconstruction of the dating of ancient history based on the multiple, incomplete, and variably reliable sources that we have at our disposal. Newton is the first to introduce concepts and methods that would later become important, but he did not arrive at the results that were sufficiently satisfactory, and once again, he publishes nothing on the subject. In both cases, we're dealing with something that would cause us to deviate from our traditional view of the rationalistic Newton. On the contrary, the great scientist is struggling with real scientific problems. There is no trace of a Newton who would confuse good science with magic or with untested tradition or authority. The reverse is true. He is a prescient modern scientist who confronts new areas of scientific inquiry clear-sightedly, publishing when he succeeds in arriving at clear and important results, and not publishing when he does not arrive at such results. He was brilliant, the most brilliant, but he also had his limits, like everyone else. I think that the genius of Newton lay precisely in his being aware of these limits, the limits of what he did not know. And this is the basis of the science that he helped to give birth to. Okay. It's actually really good. So, um okay. I'm gonna stop sharing this wonderful Indiana University's copied over version of Newton's manuscript. So let me see if I can just figure out how to do this. Okay. Let me see. I think I can just remove that. Okay. All right. So with all that, let me move on to, I guess, I'm going to skip one chapter where he talks about Copernicus. I thought that is pretty interesting. I talk about one of his social commentaries, or rather his life, about dreams and such. So this was, I guess, Carlo Rovelli wrote this one called My 1977 and That of My Friends. So this particular chapter here on February 15th, 2017, which was, I guess, if this is year's 2025, that was 8 years ago, approximately. I can't identify with most of the articles I've read recently about the youth movement that swept through Italy 40 years ago now, in 1977, as briefly and intensely as a storm. It seems to me that they're not referring to what was actually said, thought, and felt by my friends and me all those years ago. I'm not about to attempt a historical or sociological analysis, and I have no desire to mistake my own experience and that of some of my friends for some kind of historical fact. But at the time, I knew that there were many who felt as I did, and somewhere they must still exist. I'm writing this with them in mind, the many friends I had then, as well as for those who are curious about hearing an alternative version of the period. Some of those friends have maintained a somewhat rose-tinted view of what, in their eyes, have become an almost mythical time. It was a moment of intense dialogue, of dreams, enthusiasm, yearning for change, of longing to build together an alternative and better world, which they now remember with equally intense nostalgia. So much so that they have tended to present everything that's happened since in our lives as drab by comparison. This is definitely not how I feel. We were in our 20s. Life at that age is frequently wonderful, and our experience of it heightened, especially in our memory of it. This is not the fragrance of history, it is the fragrance of youth. For me, those events remain remarkable, even magical, but precisely due to the fact that they were the beginning of something. A path opened up for me. The life that followed was not grayer. I was a part of a collective discovery of a spectrum of color, and those colors have stayed with me. That said, the year after 1977 was undoubtedly experienced by many of us as a defeat. The bright desire to change the world that had momentarily seemed to open into genuine possibilities had collided with a harsh reality. Shipwrecked by the violence of the reaction of the state, which we called at the time the repression, and then by the violence that we now call terrorism. There were many of us who believed and said that nothing good would come of the armed struggle in Italy, that it was merely an extreme and foolish reaction, a desperate result of dreams that were over. The wayward comrades many of us knew were young men and women with a more absolute sense of morality than the rest of us, and therefore, as is unfortunately often the case, blinded by it. We wanted something different, and for a brief moment, along with many others, we had thought that change was coming, that it was possible to head in that direction. Which direction? Dreams have a tendency to seem inconceivable as soon as they are over, but history shows that it is sometimes some of the most apparently inconceivable dreams that become reality. Against the expectations of the quote-unquote realists, the French Revolution succeeds in breaking down the aristocracy and the ancien regime. Christianity prevails over pagan imperial Rome.
A pupil of Aristotle conquers the world. That's Aristotle. What do you call it? Alexander the Great. And his friends established libraries and centers of learning and research. The adherence of an Arab preacher transformed the thoughts and lives of hundreds of millions of individuals, and so on. More frequently, the big dreams founder against the force of daily life. They're short lived or even momentary intervals. They come crashing down and are consigned to oblivion. History has so many streams that lead to nowhere. The sects of the 4th century that wanted a church that was poor, the egalitarian mirage of Soviet communism, the recent idea of restoring the caliphate. But what frequently happens is more complex, and history follows tortuously winding courses. The Directory exits Robespierre, Wellington defeats Napoleon, and the King of France is restored to the throne. The revolution is quelled, but has it really lost? Historical movements are made by ideas, ethical judgments, passions, ways of seeing the world. Sometimes they leave behind traces that continue to work deeply upon the mental fabric of civilizations, changing it irreversibly. Revolution is an old mole that burrows deep into the soil of history. On occasion, it pops its head out. It is a fantasy of those who rule that nothing will change. But then the old mole appears when least expected. Our civilization, the set of values in which we believe, is the result of countless ideals, of the vision of those who have dared to look and to dream intensely beyond the present. What is known as the movement of 1977 in Italy is unintelligible when regarded in isolation. It was a late expression, not the last, but one of the last, self-consciously so, and as a result of this, all the more intense, of that dream that swept over not just Italy, but the whole world in the 60s and 70s. There were years in which a significant global youth movement dared to dream and to fervently hope that radical social change was possible. It certainly wasn't a movement with a structured or coherent sense of aims. In reality, it consisted of 1,000 different dreams, or different streams, sorry. But despite their great diversity, all of these streams felt that they were part of the same river, sharing the same current. From the squares of Prague to the universities of Mexico City, from the campus of Berkeley to Piazza Verdi in Bologna, from hippie communes in California, both rural and urban, to South American guerrillas, from Catholic marches in support of the Third World to English experiments in anti-psychiatry, and from Taizé to Johannesburg. Despite the huge differences in specific attitudes, there was a prevailing awareness of belonging to the same great flow, of sharing a single great dream, of being part of the same struggle, as it was commonly referred to at the time, to bring into existence a very different world. It was a dream of building a world where there would be no huge social inequalities. That's one. No male domination of women. A place without borders, without armies, without poverty. It was the idea of replacing all competitive struggle for power with cooperation, of leaving behind the bigotries, fascism, nationalisms, the narrow identitarianism that has led to the preceding generations to exterminate 100 million human beings in 2 world wars. These were far-reaching dreams, envisaging a world without private property, without envy or jealousy, without hierarchy, without churches, without powerful states, without atomistic closed family units, without dogma, a world, in word, that was free, somewhere with no need for the excesses of consumerism, where you will work for pleasure, not for getting, spending, or social climbing. Just mentioning these ideas today could lead some to say you're delirious. And yet, there were plenty of us then who believed in them all over the world. At that time, I traveled a great deal on several continents, and everywhere I went, I would come across young people with the same dreams. This is what my friends and I were talking about in 1977. Not certainly about today's worries, such as financial insecurity or the fear of not finding a job. We did not want a job. We wanted to be free from labor. If we want to recall something of those years, this is what I remember most vividly. We lived in open houses. We slept here and there. We knew how dangerous heroin was, and anyone with an ounce of sense avoided it. But we also believed that marijuana and LSD were not harmful, and joints would be passed around as naturally as today we would offer and accept a glass of wine. LSD was something else, a transformative and significant experience, to be treated with caution and respect, but from one which we could learn a great deal. Our principal occupation, as with every youth, was to fall madly in love and to lose ourselves in passions. Sex was a kind of common currency, a way of encountering and getting to know others, men, women alike. It was taken seriously, regarded as the center of life, almost like a religion. And just as every religion fills the lives of believers, we wanted to fill our lives with love and with lovemaking, as well as with friendship, music, and the invention of new ways of being together that were different from the gray, competitive ones of other generations. We were experimenting with communal living, with the exclusion of jealousy, trying to really coexist. Of course, there were arguments and falling outs, as in any family, but the feeling of being part of a huge family that was scattered throughout the world was a deep-seated one, an enormous family that was moving together, like interplanetary explorers aspiring to create a new and different world. I've always thought that the Quakers in the first European communities in America, the apostles of Jesus in Palestine, the first Christians, the young Italians of the Risorgimento, the companions of Che Guevara in Bolivia, even Plato's pupils in the academy must have felt a little like we felt. Yet, we failed completely to build a new world. We were soon enough disillusioned. Some plans were abandoned because they were mistaken, many others because they were defeated. The plausibility of our aspirations melted like snow in sunlight. We went our separate ways, each one following their own path. Was it futile to have dreamed at all? I don't think so, for two reasons. The first is that for many of us, those dreams fertilized the ground from which our lives grew. Some values from that time remain deeply rooted in us, and were carried forward by those aspirations. The extreme form of free thinking cultivated in those years, whereby everything seems plausible, whereby everything is possible and worth exploring, and every idea could be modified and adapted, provided for many of us the source for whatever it was that we went on to do with our lives. I don't know if the second reason is believable or not, but it exists all the same. Dreams of building a better world have frequently been defeated in the course of history, but they went underground and continue to be active there. And in the end, they contributed to real change. I still believe that this world, which seems ever more filled with war, violence, extreme social injustice, and bigotry, with nationalistic, racial, and regional groups attempting to wall themselves into their own narrow identities and to fight against each other, is not the only world possible. And in this, perhaps, I am not alone. Okay, just a personal injection here. I definitely agree with that. Even if revolutions for a better world or dreams seem dissipated, like in the movements in the 60s and 70s, it definitely fertilized many ideas which still stuck with us. And who knows? I mean, there's people actively working on it. I myself feel like working in the space industry is trying to achieve some of that dream, fulfilling the part of building a better world. So at least that's what I would like to think. So on the aspect of him trying LSD is actually interesting. I'm going to quote some more that was not in this book. But apparently Rovelli has credited his use of LSD during the 70s with sparking his interest in theoretical physics. So literally him using a mind-inducing psychedelic led him to pursue physics. I don't know if it's a one-to-one correlation there, but here's what he described of his experience. It was an extraordinarily strong experience that touched me also intellectually. Among the strange phenomenon was a sense of time stopping. Things were happening in my mind, but the clock was not going ahead. The flow of time was not passing anymore. And I thought, well, it's a chemical that is changing things in my brain. But how do I know that the usual perception is right and this is wrong? If these two ways of perceiving are so different, what does it mean that one is the correct one? And in a sense, right, like so he, the perception of time, how that is different when you're on that, according to his personal experience here. And I imagine that led him to really look into what is going on with what is actual reality. How do we describe what time actually is? So that I thought that was really interesting, to personally experience something that is so deviant from the normal perception of the passage of time, and then to basically have that kind of experience be like a spur for him diving into physics to try to explain this world. So he's also part of the. I think I mentioned this. No, I have not. He's also part of the. I think the Perimeter Institute, which is one of the premier independent research institutes in foundational theoretical physics. So some of the most like creative and intelligent people or physicists. Well, physicists are people. Intelligent people in the world work there. So he's part of the Perimeter Institute, and he's also part of the Santa Fe Institute in the United States. And Santa Fe Institute is another independent nonprofit theoretical research institute. And that was a little more broad in the sense that it covers computational, biological, and social systems. It's one of the top world science and technology think tanks located in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So yeah, definitely he got a lot of credentials behind him, and so. All right, let me continue on with the last passage or essay I was going to read. It's called Literature and Science and Continuing Dialogue. Definitely hits personally for me as well, since I love literature. And obviously, Carlo Rovelli does as well. So this was written on March 30th, 2012 by him, Literature and Science and Continuing Dialogue. The greatness of literature lies in its capacity to communicate the experiences and feelings of human beings in all their variety, affording us glimpses of the boundless vastness of humanity. Literature has told us about war, adventure, love, the monotony of everyday life, political intrigues, the life of different social classes, murderers, but now individuals, artists, ecstasy, the mysterious allure of the world. Can it also tell us anything about the real and profound emotions connected with great science? Of course it can. Literature is full of science, an entire genre, science fiction. It's fed by it. Playwrights have engaged with it, not the least of them, Brecht in his play Galileo, play that goes to the heart of the critical attitude upon which scientific thought is based. Okay, so quoting from the play Galileo. We put everything in doubt. What we find today, tomorrow we will erase from the blackboard, and we will not write anymore, at least until we find it again the day after that. If some discoveries follow our predictions, we will look on them with particular distrust, and only when we have failed, when beaten and without hope, we're reduced to licking our wounds. Then, with iron in our souls, we'll begin to ask ourselves if we might not be right after all. This is how, at the end of the play, Brecht has Galileo respond to his young assistant Andrea, when the latter is impatient to immediately find evidence to corroborate a brilliant idea. Many great scientists, and Galileo himself, with his dialogue concerning the two chief world systems, have written works that indisputably figures as classics of literature as well as of science. But it is the greatest literature that sought to come to terms directly with the scientific vision of the world. The striking opening of one of the most intelligent novels of the earlier 20th century, Robert Musil, spelled M-U-S-I-L, The Man Without Qualities, is a dry list of meteorological data that opens out at the end of the paragraph with their translations into vernacular and everyday terms. It was, in other words, a beautiful August day. Here, and fell agreed throughout the novel, Musil attempts to incorporate and come to terms with the vision of the world revealed by the great success of 19th century science, a world of data and numbers. The same challenge, if very differently inflected, was faced by the Milton of Paradise Lost. The poem includes these tremendous lines in which he wonders about the Copernican model that was still hypothetical at the time. Copernican model, by the way, for those who don't know, is that the sun is at the center of our solar system and the planets go around the sun, which was contrary to what people believed back in the 17th century. It was a new idea. So Milton writes this: what if the sun, by center of the world, and other stars, by his attractive virtue and their own, incited, danced about him various rounds? Their wandering course was now high, now low, then hid. Progressive, retrograde, or standing still. In sixth thou seest, and what if seventh to these? The planet Earth, so steadfast though she seem, insensibly three different motions move. The passage brims with excitement of immense step forward in science. a radical remapping of the universe that was in the process of being accomplished. All of Milton is secretly oxygenated by the new science, the immensity of the cosmos, the harmonious yet complex nature of the universe and of its movements, interstellar space and the possibility of traveling through it, the dominant role of the sun, the possibility of extraterrestrial life. Throughout Milton's writings, there is an impetus of the great conceptual revolution that in the 17th century was being brought about by science. But to find a pure singer of science, we need to go back further until we get to the great poet who was able to devise a way of thoroughly uniting poetry and science, demonstrating how intimately linked they really are, to the point of almost becoming the same thing. I am talking about Lucretius, Lucretius, in whose work the most rational of deductions acquires the power of poetry. And now, if we accept that the number of atoms is so endless that an entire human era would not be so sufficient to count them, and if there exists the same force in nature that may bring these atoms these atoms together anywhere in the same fashion that they have converged here, then it is necessary to acknowledge that there must be other terrestrial globes elsewhere in the void, and different races of men, and different species of beasts. I think he's talking about aliens existing. Probably. Naturalism, which animates science, not only was the source of Leopardi's anguish, but filled Lucretius with a kind of serenity. Quote, sometimes, like children who are afraid of the dark, we fear in the light of day things as inconsistent as those that the child is afraid of at night. And it is this thoroughgoing naturalism that allows Lucretius, the anti-religious classical writer par excellence, parentheses, quote, how many afflictions have been brought about by religion? Okay, to turn to the goddess Venus with such luminous sentiments. So, once again, quoting Lucretius here. Mother of Aeneas and all his race, delight of men and of gods, Alma Venus, who beneath the wandering stars of the heavens populates with living creatures the sea furrowed by ships, the earth fecund with fruits, though through you every living species forms. And once it has blossomed, can come out to see the light. Before you, O goddess, the winds run. At your first appearance, the clouds leave the sky. For you, the ever-industrious earth brings forth sweet-smelling flowers. For you, expanses of the seas laugh, and the becalmed sky is radiant with light. 20 centuries have elapsed since Lucretius, during which abysses of new knowledge and alongside it new boundless mysteries have gradually opened up before us. Will we be able to find someone capable today of singing with as much lucidity about the complexity and mystery, as well as the strange comprehensibility and profound beauty of nature as revealed by the lights of science? Wow, that is so beautiful. So Lucretius, I admittedly did not really know who he was. I would not say there's a level of ignorance here, but might as well just giving him Titus Lucretius Carus. He was a Roman poet and philosopher. So his only known work is a philosophical poem, De Rerum Natura, a didactic work about the tenets of philosophy of Epicureanism, which is normally translated in English as On the Nature of Things, or less often as On the Nature of the Universe. So yeah, and I suppose that's what Carlo Rovelli was quoting from here, from his only known book. So he was also like back then, a lot of people, philosophers also were scientists. So he presented the principles of atomism, which basically like everything was, fundamentally everything's made of atoms. Obviously I also talk about the mind and the soul and all sorts of other celestial and terrestrial phenomena. So it's quite interesting. But yeah, literature, to me personally, literature and science are intimately linked. I mean, one of my favorite genres is science fiction. That may be my favorite genre, actually, of literature at least. Unless you count poetry. So I can't exactly say that. All right. So for anybody who's interested, you can easily find this book in various places. I'm not sure where I got my copy. I don't remember buying online. I think I somehow picked it up somewhere. But it is very interesting for sure. There's a lot. There's more poetry and quotes from philosophers and poets and physicists in here. Um, and yeah, it's just really interesting. There's even one about like baby Jesus or something. Yeah, on Christmas Eve. Anyways, so I'm probably gonna read some more from it. Also talks about Roger Penrose. I mean, look at this weird drawing here. The Penrose calculations. At a certain point, honestly, physics calculations just become more like alchemical scratchings from what I see. So it seems magical. All right. With all that said, hopefully that was illuminating. I enjoy reading. I like reading out loud sometimes. So I will I will be back with more later. Take care.